Martin Luther King Jr. said, "The great measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy." Bladder cancer for you has taken you out of your moments of comfort and has put you into a time of challenge and perhaps controversy as you decide what kind of treatment with your doctor, what kind of treatment you want to take and is being recommended to save your life and give you a quality of life. What's the measure of your stature? Where do you stand at this time of challenge? When I was just a few months old, I fell out of my high chair and took the end of my ring finger on my left hand off. It's gone. But I've only ever had to cut 9 nails. When I go for a manicure, I get a 10% discount. We so often in our lives focus on what we've lost and fail to focus on what we've gained or what we can gain. When I was 16, I started losing weight. It was falling off me. And I was drinking water and Coke and anything I could get my hands on until after a few weeks, the doctor said, "You've got type 1 insulin-dependent diabetes." And I went from taking, 40 years ago this June, 1 injection a day, to 2 injections a day, to 4 injections a day, to 6 injections a day, and finally went and got an insulin pump about a decade ago, and it's been a tremendous thing. What have I gained from having diabetes? I was privileged to be a part of the Diabetes Control and Complications trial, which, when it published its results in 1994, changed the treatment of type 1 diabetes the world over. When I was 45, I had a mild heart attack. And the blockage was stented, but it restenosed, it blocked again a couple of months later. And 8 months after the heart attack, in the year 2001, I had to have coronary artery bypass surgery. But now my heart's healthier than it ever was prior. I have coronary artery disease. But I'm walking a little more. I'm eating a little better. And I'm enjoying life with a heart that's in good shape. And it's a good thing it is. Because at 52 in January 2008, I too began to have hematuria. But of course, it had been a snowy winter in 2008, and I'd been shoveling snow, and I probably strained something, and that's why I was bleeding a little bit, and so I delayed February because it went away, came back, went away, came back in March, went away, came back in April, and finally I decided I better see my doctor. And on Tuesday, April the 29th, 2008, I went in to see my doctor and said, "I'm not really worried about this, but I've got a little bit of blood in my urine." And he looked me right in the eye, and he said, "I am." I said, "Well, what are you thinking?" I said, I'm the type of guy that likes to know what's going on. I don't like surprises down the road. He said, "Well, we have to rule out bladder cancer." And so on Monday, June the 9th, my wife and I went to the urologist for a cystoscopy. And that's why I say I'm glad my heart's in good shape. Because when I got lying down on that table with my feet in the stirrups and my body open for all the world to see, and the doctor decided to go where no man has gone before, and found tumors, my heart rate was beating. Talk about tachycardia. It was beating faster than you probably can imagine. You've been there. And I went and had my first surgery on June the 26th. It was a Thursday. And on Friday, July the 11th, 2008, I was told that I had stage 1, high grade, grade 3. So T1, G3. Began treatments, and over the next 2.5 years, I had 11 cystoscopies, 6 transurethral resections to remove the bladder tumors, and 34 treatments of BCG, mitomycin C, and another drug called gemcitabine. But in 2010, I was told that I had muscle invasive bladder cancer. And when the surgeon told me I needed to have my bladder removed, I wasn't real thrilled about that. It had served me real well for 5 decades, and I wanted it to do that again for another 5. But on December the 15th, 2010, I went into Sunnybrook Hospital in Toronto and had the 5.5-hour surgery to remove my bladder and prostate and really most of everything south of my voice box. And then in this day of recycling, as we've heard, a length of my small intestine taken and made into a neobladder. What have I gained from what I've lost? I've lost parts of my body. I've been told I have cancer. And you know the shock of hearing that. I don't know if the doctors feel the shock of giving that diagnosis, but I can tell you the patient feels the shock of hearing it. What have I gained? Well, I'll tell you what I've gained. I've gained a trust in God that's much stronger than it was before this. There's a peace that you get through a faith that isn't available anywhere else. My faith's in God. I also trust my doctors, but not in the same way. And I have a wife who's here tonight who's been an invaluable support. And I have 2 sons in their 20s who don't let me get down very often because they'll kid me about leaking on the bed or something like that, and how can you get too serious about stuff like that? But let me tell you something else I've gained. I've gained something that, because this is bladder cancer and has to do with urine and so on, something I call the 4 Ps. Think about it, you'll get it later. I understand a little better what my passion is. I understand a little better what my priorities are. I understand a little better what my purpose in life is. And I understand a little better what my potential is to make an impact in somebody else's life. It was C.S. Lewis who said, "You don't get second things by putting them first. You get second things by putting first things first." Priorities. You don't get second things by putting them first. You get second things by putting first things first. Are you putting the first things in your life first? Do you know what they are? Do you know who they are? And are they getting that priority? Paul Alofs is the president and CEO of the Princess Margaret Hospital Foundation in Toronto. And he was quoted in the Globe and Mail recently, last week, as saying, if you can combine or align a person's passion with their action, you have an incredible force. Do you know what your passion is? Do you know what you really love to do and would give almost anything to do it? And will you take action on that? Let me just give you 4 things quickly, promise, that I suggest can help us refocus, re-energize, revitalize after a diagnosis of bladder cancer. The first thing I suggest we can do is choose to enjoy life. We can get all down. We can let circumstances affect us. We can let people affect us adversely. But joy comes from within. And to some extent, it's a choice. Be sure and tell your face. The second thing that we can do is choose to help someone else. There's a guy here today named Al Matheson. He helped check you in, some of you. And when I found out I needed to have a radical cystoprostatectomy, Al Matheson was the guy that was on the telephone to me, because he'd had his about 4 months ahead of me. And between he and Joanne, they would give me advice and counsel and encouragement, and don't worry about that, but have you had this yet? And has that occurred yet? And don't be surprised when this happens, and relax when that happens. And Al, you'll never know how much I appreciate that. So much so that I wanted to do that for somebody else. And I have the opportunity through Bladder Cancer Canada to do that for other people. Choose to help somebody. It can make a huge difference in their experience going through bladder cancer. The third thing is choose to be an example. You know, you are an example. Choose to be a good example of what it's like, not in moments of comfort, but in a time of challenge. Be the example, perhaps, that you wish you had. Be the hero. Be the mentor. Because somebody's watching you. Might be your spouse. How's he handling this? Might be your kids. How do I handle problems when they arise in my life? Well, how's Dad doing it? How's Mom doing it? It might be your colleagues. It might be your friends. And you're an example to them. And then fourthly, James Thurlow Adams said that the great value of life is spending it on something that will outlast it. How are you spending your life? Just to make a buck? Can't take it with you. Just to buy more toys? Get bladder cancer. And the toys don't really matter. How are you spending your life? Are you spending it on something that will outlast it? Can I tell you a short story? Mary Ann Bird wrote a book called The Whisper Test. Mary Ann Bird was born with a cleft palate. She had a crooked nose. She had gap teeth. She had misshapen face. When she spoke, it was garbled. And not only that, she was deaf in one ear. And when she went to school, kids would tease her. You know how kids can be. Kids can be cruel. I know I've got 2 of them. When I got bladder cancer, they were cruel. And they're in their 20s. She got teased. She got mocked. She got picked on. Today we'd call it bullying. And so she used to make up the excuse when a kid would ask her, "What happened to your face?" She would say, "I fell on some glass and it cut my face." She was convinced that nobody outside of her family could love her or even like her. until she got to Mrs. Leonard's class in school. And Mrs. Leonard was a compassionate, loving school teacher. And in those days, back in the 50s, they used to do a thing at school called the hearing test. Some of you may remember it, where you would stand against the door and you would turn one ear towards the teacher and you would cover the other ear, and she would whisper something like, "The sky is blue," or "Do you have new shoes?" And you would repeat back what she said. And Marianne Bird, her turn came, and it was last, as usual, and the rest of the class was there. And she stood, and she was deaf in one ear, and this would just be something else that kids could mock her for. So she cheated. She would turn and not really block the other ear, but she'd figured out that normally they asked about the sky or about your shoes, so she was going to get the answer right. But Mrs. Leonard said 7 words to her that changed her life. Mrs. Leonard looked at Marianne Bird with her misshapen face, with her gap tooth, with her hair lip, with her cleft palate, and she whispered, "I wish you were my little girl." And that changed Marianne Bird's life, because somebody cared. Somebody gave her value. Somebody told her, "I wish you were mine." You know, it's the small things we do that can make such a big difference in our lives and in someone else's life. What 7 words can you give to someone? Whether it's on the discussion forum on Bladder Cancer Canada's website, whether it's on the telephone, whether it's in person having a coffee with somebody that's going in for a radical cystectomy, whatever it is, what is it you can do? What's your mission in life going forward? Because bladder cancer can be a watershed moment in your life that will change from here going forward. In closing, Richard Bach, the author of the 1970s book Jonathan Livingston Seagull, said this: "Here is a test to determine whether your mission on earth is finished. If you're alive, it isn't. Are you alive? Are you even awake? What's your mission? You've got one. And if you're alive, it's not finished. Figure out your passion. Figure out your purpose. Get your priorities right. Understand something of your potential. And with the experience of bladder cancer, make a difference in somebody's life."